Hello, my name is Teresa Lavell. Currently, I serve as the president of the Solano County Board of Education. I'm here with you to read Chapter 15 of The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind. Chapter 15, Meeting Ted and Tom. After arriving in Arusha, I boarded a bus to the Nagoto Mountain Lodge where the conference was being held. As the bus exited the airport, I gazed out the window to see if Tanzania looked any different from Malawi, but what I saw was very similar. The highway was filled with minibuses crammed with people. A giant lorry belched smoke and swerved to miss an old man on a bicycle. There were children in rags, hawking cigarettes on the roadside, while students in bright uniforms marched through the dust to school. I saw village women balancing loads of vegetables on their heads and farmers tending their fields. But unlike Malawi, Arusha had trees. And not only that, after some minutes, the shuttle driver pointed off in the distance and said, "Look, there, Kilimanjaro, biggest mountain in Africa." Mount Kilimanjaro appeared even more grand and majestic than I'd seen in books, with ribbons of white snow along its peak and cloaked in a thin layer of clouds. It was hard to imagine that ordinary people like myself actually climbed to the top, but I knew they did. In my head, I began making a list of all the other places in the world I wanted to see. That mountain filled me with great confidence, but it all seemed to vanish once I reached the hotel. The lobby was a scene of chaos and confusion, filled with white people speaking English and Africans with strange and foreign accents. Everyone was chatting on their mobile phones and talking in loud, booming voices. I prayed that no one would speak to me, and after registering at the Welcome Center, I walked to the corner of the room and tried to disappear. No such luck. After some minutes, a man walked up and stuck out his hand. He had red hair and wore purple and green eyeglasses. "Hello, welcome to TED," he said. "My name is Tom. Who are you?" I'd practiced only one line of English, so I let it fly. "I'm William Kamkwamba, and I'm from Malawi." He stared at me strangely. Maybe I'd said it in Chichewa? "Wait a minute," he said. "You're the guy with the windmill." Tom Riley was in charge of organizing all the corporate sponsors at TED, including the ones who'd paid for my airfare and hotel. Months earlier in New York, Amika, the Nigerian blogger, had told Tom about my windmill, saying, "You'll never believe this story." But Tom didn't know that Amika had then searched under every rock in Malawi to find me. After talking a while, Tom asked if I wanted to tell my story on stage in front of all these people. I shrugged. Why not? "Do you have a computer?" he asked. I shook my head. "Do you have any photos of the windmill?" I did have these. A friend of Dr. Machizim's had visited Medici a few weeks earlier and helped prepare a presentation in case I needed it. He'd done this on his laptop, though at the time I had no idea this was a computer. To me, computers were big like televisions and plugged into the wall. Before the man left, he handed me a strange cube, a flash drive attached to a rope, and said, "Wear this around your neck. This is your presentation." So when Tom asked about my photos, I handed him the cube. He then plugged it into another laptop and said, "I'll just copy these onto my computer." It was then I realized what a laptop was. Of course, I thought, it's a portable computer. What a good idea. Sensing my delight at this discovery, Tom asked me, "William, have you ever seen the internet?" "The what?" "No," I said. In a quiet conference room, Tom sat me down and introduced me to this most amazing tool. "This is Google," he said. "You can find answers to anything. What do you want to search for?" That was easy. Windmill. In 1 second, he pulled up 5 million page results, pictures and models of windmills I'd never even imagined. My God, I thought, where was this Google when I needed it? Next, we pulled up a map of Malawi, then a photo of Wimbe itself, taken from a camera in outer space. It's funny to me now, at this conference in East Africa with some of the world's greatest innovators of science and technology just outside the door, there I was in this room, seeing the internet for the first time. Tom helped me set up my own email account, and for the next week, he introduced me to a range of technology: smartphones, video and 35 millimeter cameras, even an iPod Nano, which I turned over and over in my hand before finally asking, "Where is the battery?" Not long after that, I'd be hacking into iPods and iPhones and repairing them for people. But the most amazing thing about Ted wasn't the internet, the gadgets, or even the breakfast buffets with 3 kinds of meat, plus eggs and pastries and fruits that I dreamt about each night. It was the other Africans who stood on stage and shared their visions of how to make our continent a better place. There was Corneille Uwango, a biologist from Congo who'd risked his life to save endangered animals during the country's civil war. He'd even buried his Land Rover engines and stashed lab equipment in the trees to hide them from the rebels. A man from Ethiopia invented a kind of refrigerator that works using water evaporation from sand. Others were doctors and scientists using creative ideas and methods to fight AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis. Even Eric Hurstman was there, one of the first people, along with Mike McKay, to write about my windmill on his blog, AfriGadget. Eric was raised in Kenya and Sudan as the son of missionaries. What he said summed up our crowd perfectly. Where the world sees trash, Africa recycles. Where the world sees junk, Africa sees rebirth. As far as my presentation went, when I heard Chris Anderson, the event's host, call my name, my legs refused to work. "Don't worry," Tom whispered, squeezing my shoulder. "Just take a deep breath." My heart beat fast like a Mugunda drum as I climbed the steps to face the audience, which totaled about 450 people. All the inventors and scientists and doctors who'd shared their stories and ideas the previous days, they were now watching me. When I reached the stage and turned around, I went completely blind. Lights from the ceiling were shining into my eyes, so bright I couldn't even think. All the words I'd prepared seemed to dance to the drum and get lost in the glare. "We've got a picture," said Chris. He pointed to something behind me, and a giant photo of my parents' house appeared. I saw the mud brick walls, grass roof, bright blue sky. I could feel the sun. "Where is this?" he asked. "This is my home. This is where I live." "Where? What country?" "In Malawi, Kasangu," I said, then quickly corrected myself. Kasangu, Malawi." My hands began to shake. "5 years ago, you had an idea," Chris said. "What was that?" "I want to make a windmill." Chris smiled. "So what did you do? How did you realize that?" I took a deep breath and gave it my best. "After I drop out from school, I went to the library and I get information about windmill. Keep going, keep going. And I try, and I made it." I expected the audience to laugh at my silly English, but to my surprise, all I heard was applause. Not only were they clapping, but they were standing and cheering. And when I finally returned to my seat, I noticed that several were even crying. After all the years of trouble, the famine and fear for my family, dropping out of school, Kamba's death, and the teasing I received trying to develop my idea, I was finally being recognized. For the first time in my life, I felt I was surrounded by people who understood what I did. A huge weight seemed to leave my chest and fall to the assembly hall floor. I could finally relax. I was now among colleagues. For the next couple of days, they lined up to meet me. "William, can I take my photo with you?" "William, please join us for lunch." One line from my presentation even made a kind of a motto for the conference. Everywhere I went, people shouted, "I try and I made it." I was so flattered. I wished my parents, Gilbert and Jeffrey, had been there to see it. They would have been proud. When I first met Tom, he asked what I hoped to obtain someday in my life. I told him I had two goals: to remain in school and to build a bigger windmill to irrigate my family's crops so we'd never go hungry again. Basically, this was every Malawian's wish. But Tom seemed confident, and over the next several days, he approached many of his friends and colleagues at the conference and asked for their help. By the time it was over, he'd raised enough money to get me started. I'm so grateful to everyone who assisted me, and I pray that God blesses them all. After the conference, Tom flew back to Malawi to meet my family and to help enroll me in a better school. When the taxi turned onto the dirt road toward my house, the windmill appeared in the distance, looking so beautiful. As usual, its blades were spinning fast and causing the tower to sway back and forth. "It's more than functional," Tom said. "William, this is art." I gave him a tour of the compound, showing him the car battery and bulb. He laughed at the pile of radio and tractor parts in the corner of my room. "I think every great inventor has a pile of junk someplace," he said. I also demonstrated the light switches, circuit breaker, and the way I'd waterproof my bulb outside. For the porch light, all I had were Christmas lights. So I hollowed out a regular incandescent bulb and wired the Christmas lights inside. This shell served as both a weather protector and diffuser. "There's more to this than I thought," Tom said. I just laughed. I hadn't even told him about the famine. Back in Lilongwe, Tom and I visited the offices of Baobab Health, located on the grounds of Kamuzu Central Hospital, to see Soyapi and finally meet Mike McKay. Baobab was founded in 2000 by a British-American computer scientist named Jerry Douglas, who'd invented a new kind of software to help Malawi hospitals register and treat patients more effectively. Jerry was out of town at the time of our visit, so Mike and Soyapi gave us the tour. Mike started by showing me a small windmill kit they were hoping to use to power a village clinic. Its generator was a treadmill motor, which I'd never seen. He stuck a power drill in one end of the motor to make it spin, then took the two wires and attached them to a voltmeter, an amazing gadget. The voltmeter measured the motor's power at 48 volts, which was 4 times stronger than my dynamo. "What do you think?" Mike asked. "Yeah, it's cool." He then gave them both to me as a gift. "Oh, thank you," I said. "The hole in heaven just keeps getting wider." Mike and Soyapi also introduced me to deep cycle batteries. Compared to my car battery, they provide a more stable amount of current for a longer period of time. I wanted to try one of these, so Tom and I went to the office of Solar, a local solar power dealer. We bought 2 batteries and 4 solar lamps, along with energy-saving bulbs and materials to rewire my entire compound. Workers arrived at my village the following week, and for 3 days we replaced old wiring, dug trenches to bury cables, and installed proper light fixtures and plugs, though I kept my old flip-flop switches just for fun. With quality wire, a plastic conduit, and buried lines, we never had to worry about fires again. I also stuck a lightning rod on top of the windmill just in case. Once it was finished, there was a bulb for every room, including 2 outside. I also installed solar panels on my roof to help store electricity when the wind wasn't blowing. These days, every home in my village has one of these panels, complete with a battery to store power. With each home lighted, the compound finally glowed at night. After being refused by several schools because of my age, I was finally accepted at African Bible College and Christian Academy, ABCCA, in Lilongwe, which was run by Presbyterian missionaries. The headmaster, Chuck Wilson, was an American from California, and my teacher, Laura Lee McLean, was from Canada. Although I was behind the other students, Mrs. McLean and Mr. Wilson agreed to take a chance on me, admitting me. But Mrs. McLean had one condition, that when I left school each day, I didn't go home to poverty. I had to find a place to live in Lilongwe. Since I had no relatives in town, Jeffrey offered me a room in his house. I had my own bed and a desk for studying, and the housekeeper, Nancy, prepared plenty of Nasima and relish so I didn't feel homesick. Everything was great, but because we were in the city, we experienced power cuts several times a week. After all that hardship to bring electricity to my village, here I was sitting in the dark in my success. "You should carry a windmill everywhere you go," Jerry joked. Over time, Jerry became a great friend and teacher. When he still lived in England, he flew airplanes and worked as a helicopter mechanic, so I always asked him questions about motors and such. Sometimes after dinner, he explained how helicopters worked, how the spinning blades captured wind to lift the heavy machines, and how the back rotors kept them from spinning in circles. Jerry also helped me with my English, particularly my L's and R's, something we Chichewa speakers always get confused. These lessons were sometimes done in front of the bathroom mirror so Jerry could demonstrate. "Okay, William, watch my tongue and say library, 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 library. You'll get it." My class at ABCCA used a distance learning curriculum from America that we learned by computer over the internet. Just a couple of months before, I'd never even seen the web, and now I used it every day to speak with teachers in Colorado. At first, I was ashamed of my poor English, especially after hearing 5-year-old children speak better sentences. During my first few days, I became quite depressed. But my tutor, a Malawian named Blessings Chikakulu, offered me some great encouragement. Mr. Blessings had also come from a poor village near Dowa, so poor that he was 30 years old before he got a college degree. Now he was working at ABCCA as a teacher. "Don't be discouraged and give up just because it's hard," Mr. Blessings told me. "Whatever you want to do, if you do it with all your heart, it will happen." Eventually, the money from my donors at TED allowed me to help my family in many ways. I installed iron sheets on our compound to replace the grass roofs. I bought mattresses so my sisters didn't have to sleep on the dirt floor, plus covered water buckets to protect our drinking supply from pests. I bought better blankets to keep us warm at night in winter, malaria pills and mosquito nets for the rainy season, and I arranged to send everyone in my family to the doctor and dentist. And for once, I finally managed to repay Gilbert for all the help he'd given me. Several years before, Gilbert's father had died and he'd had to drop out of school for lack of money. So with my donations, I put Gilbert back in school, along with Jeffrey and several other cousins who dropped out during the famine. I even paid the neighbors' kids' tuition. And after years of dreaming about it, I was finally able to drill a borehole for a deep well, which gave my family clean drinking water. My mother said this saved her 2 hours each day carrying water from the public well. Using a solar-powered pump, I filled 2 giant tanks and piped water to my father's fields. Irrigation allowed us to plant a second maize crop. The storage room would never be empty again. The spigot from the borehole was also free for all the women in Wimbe to use. It's the only running water for miles around, and each day, dozens of women come to my home to fill their buckets with clean, cool water without having to pump and pump. During my holidays from school, I constructed a bigger windmill that pumped water, which I called the green machine on account of its color. That pump now sits above the shallow well at home and irrigates a garden where my mother grows spinach, carrots, tomato, and potatoes, both for my family to eat and to sell at market. Finally, the dream had been accomplished. My family couldn't have imagined that the little windmill I built during the famine would change their lives in every way, and they saw this change as a gift from heaven. Whenever I came home on weekends, my parents had a new nickname. They called me Noah, like the man in the Bible who built the ark, saving his family from God's flood. Everyone laughed at Noah, but look what happened, my mother said. My father agreed. You've put us on the map. Now the world knows we're here. In December 2007, I went to the United States to see the windmills of California, just like the ones in my textbook back home. I landed in New York City right in the middle of winter, wearing only a sweater. The woman at the airline counter then informed me they'd lost all my luggage. We'll call you, she said. Huh? I didn't even have a phone. Some of Tom's friends met me at the airport. As the taxi pulled out, I finally saw the great American city I'd read so much about. We drove over smooth roads with several lanes in each direction, across bridges with no water underneath, followed by more roads and more bridges. The tall buildings in the distance appeared so pressed together that it was hard to imagine people walking between them, much less building them. It just so happened that Tom lived in one of these buildings in Lower Manhattan. His apartment was on the 36th floor, and I wondered how we would ever get up there. One of his friends then showed me the elevator. What is that? I asked. I pushed the button, and in 10 seconds, I was 36 floors up in the sky. Already, I had so many questions. Inside, Tom greeted me heartily. His apartment was surrounded by windows, looking as if you could walk right over the edge. Before that day, the highest I'd ever been besides an airplane was the top of my windmill. It took some time to adjust, and that night I had trouble sleeping. The next day, I went underground into the subway, where I watched the people enter the gates using sliding money cards. Another great idea. The sidewalks of New York left me exhausted, with hundreds of people running in every direction. One of the things I noticed in New York is that people don't have time for anything, not even to sit down for coffee. Instead, they drink it from paper cups while they walk and send text messages. Sometimes they walk right into you. Touring the city, I began to wonder how Americans could build a skyscraper in a year. But in 4 decades of independence, Malawi couldn't even bring clean water to a village. We could send witch planes into the skies and ghost trucks along the roads, but we couldn't even keep electricity in our homes. We always seemed to be struggling to catch up. Even with so many smart and hardworking people, we were still living and dying like our ancestors. The following week, I flew to California and visited the San Diego Wild Animal Park, where I saw giraffes, hippos, and elephants for the first time. Just a half hour from my home in Wimbe was the Kasungu National Park, where all of these same animals lived in the wild. But it took me flying 10,000 miles to America to finally see them up close. I had to laugh. But of all the places I went, nothing impressed me more than the windmills of Palm Springs. For a moment, after entering the wind farm, I felt like I was back home. The setting was familiar, lush green flatland and mountains in the distance, and all of it draped in a bright blue sky. But here, in that empty space between me and the hills, were miles upon miles of windmills. More than 6,000 of them shooting from the ground like giant mechanical trees. The round white trunks were like cartoons I'd seen on television, so big around they could fit my family's entire house. Looking up, I saw the 100-foot blades twirling slowly like the toys of God. Each one stood 200 feet in the air, with a wingspan longer than the airplane that had brought me to America. The head engineer of the farm took me inside one of the machines where computer screens revealed all kinds of information, everything from voltage output to wind and blade speed. In total, the wind farm produced more than 6,000 megawatts, which was delivered to thousands of homes by underground cables. By comparison, just 600 megawatts could light up all of Malawi with energy to spare. At the time, Eskom produced only 224 megawatts. It was an incredible feeling to see the machines that I'd imagined for so long. Now here they were, twisting in the wind before me. I realized I'd come full circle. The pictures in the book had provided the idea, hunger and darkness gave me inspiration, and I'd embarked myself on this long and amazing journey. Standing there, I waited for direction. What would I do next? What was in my future? Looking across the field of windmills, I saw how the mountains seemed to tumble and dance along their twirling blades. They seemed to be telling me something that I didn't have to decide right away. I could return to Africa and go back to school. After that, who knows? Perhaps I would study the machines and learn how to build them, then plant my own forest of mechanical trees in Malawi. Perhaps I could even teach people how to build simpler devices like I had at home so they could provide their own light and water. Perhaps I'd do both. Whatever I decided to do, this lesson would always stay with me. If you want to make it, all you have to do is try.